Welcome everyone. I'm Phil Greenstreet from Rosco Digital Imaging in Los Angeles. My job at Rosco is making backdrops, such as this fine example behind me. Soft drop. I'll be the moderator for this event. We are recording this and we'll share it later on with a link that'll go out to everybody who registered to this. If anyone has any questions, there will be a question session in a minute or two. So start sending them in, and we'll try to get through them as we can. Just a bit of background: Rosco produce a range of products for the filmmaking industry. Backdrops, obviously, gels, LED lights. Puts us in a slightly unique position in the industry in that we work with both art departments and camera departments. So as you can imagine, encouraging dialogue between these two groups is something dear to our hearts. It's a way of improving our lot in life and just generally adding to the maintenance of our sanity. The relationship between a director and a cinematographer on set has been likened to a marriage. However, it's been pointed out that the cinematographer already has a marriage in a sense, and that would be to the production designer. Now it happens that John Goldsmith, who was the designer on the Perry Mason project, couldn't be with us, but we do have the next best thing, which is supervising art director Chris Farmer. I first encountered Chris on the TV show Castle, I think, some time back. And since then, he's been supervising art director on projects such as The Mandalorian, The Dark Crystal, Logan, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Darran Tiernan, cinematographer, and I first met when he was on the short-lived show at Warner Brothers called Stalker. But he survived that experience and has gone on to shoot Westworld, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Discovery, and 4 episodes of the groundbreaking American Gods, which is one of my favorite shows. David Franco and I suspect we first met at Camera Image maybe 5 years ago, but I'm a little fuzzy on that for some reason. He's been the cinematographer also on Westworld, but other projects like Boardwalk Empire, Vinyl, Game of Thrones. He was an Emmy winner for Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and to me, best of all, shot second unit on Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So let's start by having a quick look at some of the Perry Mason trailer. Okay, well, that was a super cool trailer. Would you say that there's a little of all of you in that? Was it selected from different episodes, or is it like all of the first episode, like they so often have to do?
No, it's a mix of I guess a bunch of shots. So I don't know if every episode, but there's definitely shot that are not mine. Darran?
Yeah, I think the first couple of episodes, there's maybe the first 4 or 5, yeah.
Well, it's a great look. I mean, the period work was really good. I know that Darran and David both worked on Westworld. Chris, have you worked with either of these guys before this?
So, yeah, I don't know if people put their camera back, but I have a black screen now. Yeah.
Well, I can see you.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Hey, Lauren, if you just ping me to make sure that everyone can see us.
Okay.
The webinar is entitled Bridging the Gap, Is there a gap between the art department and the cinematography? I mean, is it an issue? Is it a problem that comes up for you guys?
So, I mean, for me, the gap can exist. So, I mean, it's always that, you know, when you start a project, you make sure you establish the communication as soon as you can with the art department. So obviously the backdrop is a big part, but there's every level, right? So as soon as possible is to establish the best communication possible. I mean, I always say to everybody who's in the art department, you know, if it doesn't look good in front, there's no way I can do anything. So for me, it's so much more easier than what's in front of the camera is it works for everybody. So I need to figure out as quickly as possible. I always say I'd rather have less light and better paint or more paint or, you know, something like that. So so it's just to establish as soon as possible to make sure everybody is on the same page on the project, and you don't get surprised.
Yeah.
Chris is still having audio issues.
No, I would agree with David. I think it's the first person I look for when I start a project is the production designer.
So, hey Chris, are you with us? Sorry, so still not hearing Chris. Hey Darren, when we were setting up this, I talked to David quite a lot, but I think you must have come on afterwards. When did you all come on the project? I mean, do you all come on at the same time, or?
I think I started probably, like I met with David probably a couple of weeks before you started shooting, and you know, and then I tried to turn. I was still shooting the card at the time, I think, and I think I actually joined you for like half a day, David. I think when you were shooting like the New Year's Eve
Right.
sequences in studio, and then I started the following Monday with my director, and I visited David as much as I could and watched everything he was shooting. So I think I basically started probably the week after you started shooting. I think that's yeah.
So on this project, I mean, because there was a bit of a delay hiring the other person, but I always try, you know, if I'm hired second or am I first to get involved, if I'm the second one, or involve the other DP as soon as possible, because he's gonna have to deal with the same, you know, with the backdrop. And I mean, I'd rather the person get involved and try to find the, you know, sometimes he can find some problem that I didn't foreshadow, or I didn't figure out. So when two people working on the problem, it's always a bit better. And I mean, you know, we have sometimes different way of doing things, so we have to make sure that works for everybody. So that's the only thing. But on this project particularly, I mean, he came in a bit late because we couldn't make up our mind. He was busy.
So, of course, Chris by then had already been on the project for months, of course. When did you join the process?
Is Chris back on?
Chris, hey, we're still not getting audio on you.
Yeah, I think he's trying to fix it with Lauren. Yeah.
I mean, when I came in, Chris was already working. I'm sure Chris was there from the start with the production designer John. So they're working before us, obviously.
Yeah, because typically when we're joining a project, we see the art department first, and then the camera comes in after that. And
right.
I mean, if anything, lately we've been seeing that the camera really doesn't have enough, is never brought on early enough.
Yeah,
at least by our
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And everybody's prep time is dropping, and I think the race to the bottom seems to have slowed. but we were getting to a point where people were being given 5 weeks prep time for a show, which was insane. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And obviously a show of this
Yeah, I mean,
complexity, that would not be working.
yeah, I mean, especially when you have to build this, you know, the extensive backdrop and studio set, and so you need that time frame. Yeah, I mean, we're lucky, I guess, on this show. I mean, it was fairly. I was involved, even if I was not on this, you know, in LA, because I was in New York, but I got involved as soon as they had questions, so I was there present. So I mean, this is the kind of show, I mean, working prior with Tim Van Patten, so I got involved very quickly. So it was, on this show in particular, was not an issue. I mean, the issue is always making the decision about are we building, are we not building, are doing backdrop or not doing backdrop. You know, that's once we get going, it's time to make sure, especially when you don't have the script.
Hey, Chris, are you on now? Do we have you?
No, we don't.
Okay. So obviously a very atmospheric period piece. What were your influences in creating the look? Oh, that sounds like Chris is actually achieving something.
There we go.
All right. So what references did you have when you were creating the design or part of that design process for this show? I mean, did you look back to other movies, or did you have other sources?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. Sorry, Phil.
Given that you've got a period show, what were your influences in the design end of creating the look of Perry Mason?
Well, I think for John's process was very much research based. I don't really think that he went back to too many other movies. He really just is a solid researcher of the period, you know, from clothing through vehicles, architecture. Him having an architecture background, he very much locked on to the architecture and just a general look of sort of Depression era Los Angeles, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about cinematically, David?
I mean,
yeah, same. Yeah,
definitely say that we did look at a few movies for sure. Yes. It escapes me now. The Jack Nicholson movie about
Chinatown.
Chinatown, yes, was looked at quite a bit.
Yeah.
I see it.
I mean, we went back to see the period and how it was represented, but it's a tough. There are very few show that kind of show that you want to emulate directly. I mean, every year we evolve in how you proceed. You used to have rules about how you move the camera, handheld, not handheld, or how things looks. I mean, basically, my goal for this, I try to do this show in black and white, but we got squashed down. Even with that, it was not even a fight. You know, it was too bad because one day we'll get a TV show in black and white.
Yeah.
So after that, I said, okay, we're not doing black and white, but I don't want to do a muted, desaturated, you know, period sepia look, because that for me, that would be it's so I guess a bit cliche, but limits you know ourselves in how much we can show or how much of the palette we can show. So I try to go back to the first you know color pictures and what was more representative, you know. So we find, so that I as far as reference, I was much more towards, you know, stills for me.
Yeah.
Still of the period to see what the representation, and, you know, as far as colors as well.
Darran?
Yeah, no, well, when I came in, there was a wealth of information for me to get through, from police photographs at the time, you know. David, what was the name of the photographer? It was an Australian photographer, wasn't it? There was a great book that you and Tim gave me for a while, which was about Australian crime photography from the 30s, I think.
Yeah, it was black and white. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a crime photography. I forgot the name.
Yeah, and you know, and Tim's office was great. He always used to say to me, just walk in there anytime you want, because he had so much photographic material on the walls, you know. And then, you know what, like, and I would say I'm used, generally I try not to be influenced by movies when I'm doing something, or TV shows. I tend to look at photographs, you know, that are relevant to the storyline, you know. So and when I'm shooting, I find it very difficult to watch anything else. So
yeah.
But
Yeah,
we
did have a nice collection of LAPD archive photos from the 30s as well.
Yeah.
It was very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, as you were saying, Chris, as well, John's knowledge and kind of enthusiasm for the period was always, to me, was great. You know, every time we were out on scouts looking for things.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Where were the locations? I mean, obviously, trying to find period Los Angeles, and every 20 years, Los Angeles seems to get demolished and rebuilt again. So
interiors are good. Like, you can find the interiors.
Find the interiors, and a lot of the exteriors are just the ones that are still existing are just covered in layers and layers of, you know, the last 50 or 60 years of billboards and bits and pieces and signs and pipes, but there's definitely parts of LA that I don't even think that I knew existed, and I've lived here for 30 years. You know, that the guys seem to find, and just with a little bit of work, you know, it was 1930 again. So it's definitely there. I mean, there's a lot downtown still. Pasadena, for sure. San Pedro. We spent quite a bit of time in San Pedro. It's one of those cities that just hasn't seemed to change very much, you know.
Yeah, that ranch house you found was pretty awesome as well.
The which, sorry?
The house out on the ranch, I guess Perry Mason's house.
Oh,
right.
Thousand Oaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a turn of the century ranch house.
Yeah. So what are the challenges of shooting a period series, when you're deciding whether it's locations, whether it's a studio set? What's the criteria really? I mean, what drives that? What motivates? What drives the decision making there? I guess Chris first, because it starts with the design.
Yeah.
What drives the decision making?
Whether you go to a studio set, whether you go to a location, whether you actually build something, or whether you find something and read.
I mean, there's definitely a few factors there. I mean, I think you know, there's obviously a cost to factor in. The amount of pages that you're going to shoot there, whether they're day and night, how the exteriors work for day and night. I mean, for instance, the ranch out in Thousand Oaks is sort of like a big movie backlot. There's a lot of stuff out there. So, but it was far away from the studio, just in or out, just on the edge of the zone. And so I think we ended up shooting there not as much as we thought we would at first, you know. And we rebuilt the whole house on stage, interior, and did all our interiors on stage and all our exteriors out there. I know, David, for you, it wasn't so great for a night shooting out there, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, obviously the process is, I mean, John's process was to find something real and recreated it, right?
Yeah.
Because remember at the start there was another house we were supposed to get, and then we couldn't. The reason we couldn't build an airport because we have to choose a location that fits a period, and then we have to build an airport. So on top of it, so you know, every location needs a different, you know, set of problem, and so how to fix it or how to solve them. So on this particular location, we needed something in the field and something looked at the edge of Los Angeles at the time, and they were about to get swallowed, I guess, with the modern world. So building the airport next to that building was the hard part. And John, you know, once he found that building, John recreated completely the interior with more flexibility inside shooting because it was such a low ceiling, small rooms and stuff like that. But the other house they found before we found that one was very different, right? And the structure, the style, it was, I don't know, how do you call the style of that house?
Yeah, I mean, it was it was like a real two up, two down farmhouse, you know?
Yeah. So basically, if we'd have chose that, the interior would have been quite a bit different. So I think at the start is finding something that exists in the real world and rebuilding the reality in a more friendly environment. But like you said, I mean, what's on the page, how much or how many we need to shoot, how many pages we need to shoot, and how flexible to help the schedule and fit everything in the process. As far as shooting, you know, every place there's always solution as far as lighting and figure out how to shoot, and there's always solution. There's never easy one, you know. I mean, it's like it's very rare when you have a place where it's like so easy that it's a given, but sometimes there was a plus and minuses no matter where you go.
Yeah. One of the questions, not from me, I hasten to add. Obviously, one of the choices that was made was whether to go with green screen or backdrops or presumably LED walls. How did that decision-making process go, and what were the criteria that you applied in choosing the approach? Again, I guess it starts with a discussion between Chris and David about what they want to do, what they want to see.
Well, I think for Mason's house, once we decided on that location and the amount of work we were going to do on stage with the interiors, the idea was that there was a fair amount of windows in that set. So I think that, David, we had talked about how much you would probably see outside the windows and how it was going to be lit, and what our best approach would be was basically for you guys, Phil, to come out and shoot backdrops in almost not 360 degrees, but probably 270 degrees of that set was, you know, it was on track, so we could pull it and cheat it around a little bit, but we basically had most of the windows covered with a backdrop at some point. And yeah, I mean, that we had to, let's see, the views out of one side where we were originally going to build the airport. When we shot the backdrops, we didn't have the scenery to shoot actually built out at the location. So that was another little added fun thing that we ended up having to do, was just drop in the conceptual scenery into the backdrop later on before you printed it. So
Yeah, I mean, as far as what what technique to use, it's I mean, I don't know, the LED panel, to live in that special word, it's almost, it's a different category. What's technically involved and how much it costs and the limitation of the size and stuff. It puts it very limiting. For now anyway, it's limited aspect. Except if you do the entire job on the stage like they do Mandalorian. Darran, you should talk about that. But as far as the blue screen or green screen against backdrop, for me, the problem is that I have with green screen is it never looks right, because especially during the day, for me, when you have a day backdrop, it creates a luminance in the frame that you cannot recreate with green screen, because the green screen has to be exposed properly. So the backdrop actually lights a little bit the obvious and gives you a little bit of real world that you cannot eliminate from the green screen, because where you should have a light, there's a green screen. So in a way I expose the backdrop is always over, so it's actually it's a light in itself. So I always are gonna have a tendency to do backdrop no matter what, and then if we need to enhance or add something, then the VFX will add on top of the backdrop instead of having a green screen.
Yeah.
Darran?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of green screen either, and I know David. Because of some of the locations we were at, we were in very tight spaces, or there was a very busy street outside, and we had no choice but to use green screen. But it was tricky because you're getting all that kickback and spill, which is even though it's come leaps and bounds of getting rid of green spill, it's still not perfect unless they go in. Individually removing everything. And I would agree with David about backdrops as well. And adding something to it, like your backdrop there, Phil. VFX could easily have a boat going by in the background on the river later, for example. I just before this whole pandemic caused our lockdown, I was shooting an Apple TV series called Foundation, which is a sci-fi thing, and they have, and I'm sure Chris is similar on Mandalorian, I believe, as well, as they have huge, large LED screens outside spaceships, outside large sets, which was fantastic, and I enjoyed using them as well, especially when you've got large openings. It's because then you can actually have generated light coming from the LED screen, so it actually becomes a lamp in your set, so, yeah.
So is there a crossover point for you where the number of shots that you want to make, there's a cost, and it's on a per shot basis? But do you find that it's limiting you in your creative choice of angles and shots when you're actually, if you know that every shot's going to cost you money, does that limit you? And in a more general question, probably for Darran and David, are you actually aware of budget restrictions during the course of the show, in the same way that I'm sure Chris is instantly aware of every single dollar that impacts his budget at every moment? I mean, do people come up to you and complain about your budget, or is it kind of once you get rolling, is it pretty much free reign? Darran?
Okay, I would say that I'm always aware of the budget, because you're always amongst the heads of department, especially in prep. So you hear the conversations with the art department, you hear the conversations with the costume department, casting, whatever. So I think we're always aware of money, even though, as a DP, I don't know what the budget is for a camera department or a lighting department or a grip department, but I have my key grip, my gaffer, the first AC, who might be usually running the camera crew. They're the ones that will always come to you and say, well, they can't have this, or we can't have that, or could we change this? So yeah, I'd say I'm always aware. Wouldn't you say, David? We're always aware of money.
Oh yeah. Oh man, this is, and it's so funny, but it's like, I mean, it's like even, and people who do smaller budget and stuff, they think, oh, I'm gonna work on the big budget, and then we're not gonna talk about it. It's not true.
No.
I never did a project when money is not an object, and every conversation, and the producer comes to you, and he starts to present this angle, oh, maybe artistic, and the person is always, half of the times he's trying to present that as a creative choice, and I always stop here and say, well, hang on, is it a money issue or artistic choice? And then we'll have the conversation, but don't, you know what I mean? I want to have a frank conversation. If he says, I don't want to have, I hate the process. I'm not selling carpet, or I'm not, I keep saying it to them, I'm working for you. So this is the best method, I think, to achieve the result we all want. And then if you tell me you don't have the money, then I'd rather you tell me you don't have the money and we'll figure something out. But don't tell me it's going to be better at green screen because some reason, if he doesn't have the money. So it's but no matter what, there's always discussion of money. I mean, on this project as much as any other project, on every department, from what's in front of the camera, so what we're using, equipment we're using, there's always a foreign cost. So yeah, it's that's the sad part. And I'm sure even on those 200 million or 250 million dollar movie, I'm sure they're still talking about money somehow.
Yeah.
In a way, it seems to be when you don't talk about money, it's when you don't have any.
Very true.
It's like, okay, you're shooting on the location, you have that camera. It's like nobody's. Yeah. It's the lower you go, and the big problem on the type of show, on that show, it's the period. The period costs so much money, and I think most of the time people underestimate what the period costs and how much it costs to remove undesirable, like a lamppost and cars and traffic control. And I think every day, every time, every show I did as a period show, they completely underestimate that aspect of it. Especially, I mean, this show, it's in 30s, so that people realize. But if you do a show of 1980s, producers think, oh yeah, we just go outside and do it. But the 80s is 40 years ago, and we have to do the same work as we do if 1930 show. Yeah.
Must admit, one of the things we've noticed lately is the change in the night skies. That in 20 years ago, if you looked at New York at night, the sky was always brown. I mean, it's hard to sell the idea of a brown sky, but with the light pollution from all the sodium vapor bouncing off the cloud, the sky 80% of the time would have been brown. Now, of course, with the LEDs coming in, suddenly there's a bunch of white light going up and sodium vapor ain't changing. So one of the things we're finding with the backdrops is some of the backdrops don't look realistic enough because they've all got sodium vapor, and now the reality is that it's not. So stuff definitely changes, and I think there's a tendency to believe that anything that's within your lifetime has stayed the same, but in fact, like you said, 40 years isn't change. I mean, and if we were talking the difference between 1900 and 1940, oh yeah, people would say yes, of course, that was an enormous difference, or even the difference between 1940 and 1980. But then you think, oh, well, 1980 now, that's pretty much the same thing because it's changed totally.
Yeah.
With everything you see. So probably a question for Chris. When you started on this project, I mean, obviously it was a classic television show, originally from the 50s, 60s, and set in presumably the 50s and 60s. So was it hard going in with this idea of recreating, reinterpreting a classic show? Did you just sort of throw that away and start over because it was different time period, basically an audience that probably hasn't seen the original? Did you feel that you had a blank slate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we looked at maybe 1 or 2 episodes of the original black and white, and it was, I don't think there was really very much there for us to pull from. I think it had been remade a couple more times as well since then, but it's sort of, you know, it's black and white, and it's very brightly lit, and I think that we definitely wanted to not look like that. And you know, I know that some of the characters in the original version, ours are sort of shifted around a little bit. There's different people playing different roles, but we just sort of looked at it, remembered it, and never went back to it. I think that was our, you know, it started with a blank slate, essentially. Yeah. I mean, don't you think, David? It was really nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look at anything. I mean, obviously, I knew the kind of show it was, and it's so far away from the you know, spirit of this one. Yeah, so yeah, no, it's a complete new start. It's a complete different format as well. You know, we talked the time it was a serial, right? So the murder was resolved every episode. This one is, you know, spread over eight episodes in the spirit of, you know, a lot of shows nowadays when everything, it seems to be towards the 8 episode story span. Yeah, 8 or 10. Yeah.
We've had a question come in for Darran. When you're looking for your still photos, when you're doing your research, do you have any specific resources, databases, or secret internet tips that you use to find that stuff?
I think there is.
You just Google it like everyone else.
No, well, Google can always be useful. I think, first of all, I react to what the story is, you know, whatever we're reading. And actually, I can tell you a story about Perry Mason, is that my director, Denise Erdogan, she was very much into stills, you know, based on whatever she felt the scene was, she would find a still. So I would always have these stills. This is like, and there's a scene, which is not to give away the story, but Perry Mason is in a graveyard during the day. And, you know, I was just looking for, you know, images one day, and I found this beautiful image of these children in London running through Paddington Cemetery. And Denise loved it so much that we actually shot the photograph like for the opening scene. You know what I'm talking about, David and Chris? It's like the kids running through that. So that was cool, because we actually found something that, like, if you put in children playing in a cemetery, you will not find any list of this. It was complete accidental. I don't know how I even found it, but there is resources. But I think I love photography. I think most cinematographers I know are crazy about photography, still photography, and I have a lot of books, a lot of, you know. So if something is a motive to me, then I kind of go, I think I know an image for that. And the image is not, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a direct copy of, you know, we're going to use that image and copy it for a scene, even though I did do it in Perry Mason. But it's just a motive, you know. So, and there is some cool sites of like fans of movies who have literally taken a movie and made stills out of them, and I will find them, and
Film Grab,
type them up. Film Grab is one of them. Yeah. There's a couple other ones.
But I mean, it's hard. It's hard to, you know, you realize you have Google, but for me to get in the essence. Because it's weird how sometimes I read the script and I see in my head the type of mood and lighting, but like sometimes I search for hours and trying to find it. And I say, there's no way this popped up. You know, I invented this in my head. I must have seen something like this. But it's like, it takes hours for me to go deep in Google and image stock and go through my books and to find stuff that is actually going to be close to what I felt, when I read the script. So I wish I had 2 assistants just doing that,
Yeah.
But I mean, and then we did it because at one point I have to let it go and I have to do the other stuff, like figure out and fighting with the producer for the budget. But it is hard. It is not a. I mean, I guess now we have the internet, but it's not that that easy to find. So I mean, what I'm trying to do every time I see something, not on a project, but every time there's an image which says something to me, I make sure I photograph it and catalog it, because those images usually I always come back to. Any show I do, from modern show to a period show, somehow I always go back to those strong images that I have in my bank of my reference. Same thing is movie sequence. It seems like I always show the same movie sequence to every director I work with. But it's I mean, so as you go along with in life, it's just to try to put that in your bag of reference, like, basically. And I went on, even sometimes when I have something in my head I can't find, I go with a still and I go in the studio, or I try to emulate what I want to do, a little bit. That was before we start doing the test. So something I need to sell the producer or director on, or the production designer, I make sure. I wish I could draw and paint, with color, so that would help me, but I'm so bad that's not.
There was one resource that we went to. I mean, we obviously had a full-time researcher, but one site in LA called waterandpower.org, and it's nothing to do with the Department of Water and Power. It's I think it's a non-profit research group that has basically Los Angeles from its inception in the late 1800s or whenever that was, all the way through to the 70s, and it's all great black and white imagery, days, nights, street scenes, architecture. It was pretty awesome, I have to say. It was very, very useful to us. Just keep going back, and we keep finding more and more. Especially for our little Angel's Flight scenes.
Have you guys come across Lawrence Scher's website, shotdeck.com? Basically, he's got an assembly of, I think it's some 80,000 images from movies that you can search by various criteria. So you can say backlit, turquoise, swimming pool, and up will pop a whole bunch of images referencing that color, that look, that object. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. I mean, he's only scratching at 80,000. He's scratching the surface. But it's a good resource. So shotdeck.com. I think it's beta testing right now, but worth a look. So what about practical lighting? You referenced the street lights. Is that a major source of discussions between you two? Because obviously the practicals that you want to put in the scene are going to be very different to your actual lighting needs. So how does that conversation go?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is it's a discussion too. I mean, for me, as much as possible, I'm trying the practical light to be an instrument, and it's always a bit tricky when you further go back. So if you do something in 30s and 40s, it's like the easiest thing to light is with fluorescent tube. So if you have a fluorescent you know, a kitchen in the 70s. That's so easy. It's self-lit and looked great for me anyway. And then when you go back in period 30s, you just those specific candidness of light. And so to choose the shade and the intensity is it's a big decision to make sure, you know, light looks as natural as possible. So you don't have to enhance every practical with your own lighting. So yeah, so every practical I try to get my nose in there and decide the shade and the shape and the height and all that. So it actually helps me lighting the scene. So I'm very involved with that. You know, usually it's the decorator who's involved in that.
Yeah.
When you have just
Darran,
fire
preferences
and windows, like for Game of Thrones, that's so there's no practical. You have fire and windows, and then, so this is it. You know, live with it. Yeah.
So Darran, I mean, you came on, like you said, only 2 weeks before shooting.
Well, yeah,
would you prefer to have been first on, or does it really matter?
In this case, it didn't. You know, it didn't. I was actually really happy to be on board and collaborating with David. So, you know, sometimes I have been on shows where I went second, and you wish you had went first. But sometimes going first can be really bad, rough road as well. You know, so you have to smooth the path for everybody else coming behind you. I was just excited to do this project, and I could see they were doing something special. So, and I think, you know, in a lot of ways, even though we were doing the same shows, I think our experience is very different. You know, David and Tim, you both have an amazing collaboration spirit, and you do amazing work together and have done in the past. And for me, I was working with a director I'd never worked with before, and also who's a very kind of unique thinker as a director. So, you know, it was a lot. There was a lot of room, a lot of ground to cover. I think I had about 5 or 6 weeks prep, I think, before I started shooting. And you know, we had to see. I know thankfully we shot on locations that David and Tim had shot in already, but then our needs were different. So, for example, the assembly, you know, the church, all, you know, everything was slightly different. And then there was some locations I might have shot on, David, just before you did as well, like maybe Sister Alice's house, which and you know, so it doesn't really bother me, to be honest. You know, if the work is good, I think, because you kind of go in your own zone, but you actually have to, you know, honor what's gone before you as well. But that's okay, as long as there's collaboration, like true collaboration between everybody. And I always felt that from David and Tim, you know, so we were always encouraged, you know.
So we actually had a question from Robert Joseph about hanging soft drops. This is us washing our dirty laundry in public, I think. The question is, can you talk about hanging soft drops? I know we had some trouble on Perry Mason getting them squared up. This involved me and Chris going on stage with rulers and levels and a piece of chalk, as I recall. I guess none of you guys were actually involved in the hanging of it, so that's kind of a tricky question. But were there any things that sprung to mind that might be good advice for future generations of soft drop users?
Oh, for me?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that soft drop for the courtroom was mostly successful. Definitely, you and I had to go in and make a couple of tweaks, as you know, in not only in the hanging of it, but in just like some of the squaring up. And you know, it was a completely fabricated landscape, if you like. So it was downtown Los Angeles, 1931. That was built in the computer off of an original map. So it was a recreation of downtown LA, 1931. That was then matte painted, digitally matte painted over, and then the file was produced. You guys printed it. It definitely had some challenges as far as perspective, because not only was our set quite large, but we definitely had to start to wrap the corners on that backdrop to make it not only have all of our views from the windows covered. So one end of it, which was the back end of the courtroom, definitely, I would not advise wrapping that type of building again. I mean, it's very vertical building with a lot of horizontal planes that didn't necessarily translate very well to a slight curve when you looked at it through the window of the set.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
we tend to put like the corner of a building pointing at you on a corner if we can, just because there's enough deception in there to sort of fool the eye.
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't quite get the last part there.
Oh, sorry, we tend to put corners of buildings on corners for that reason. That there's just enough confusion in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that part of the city in 1931, well, it still is now, there's a slight rise too on, I think it's Hill Street. So there was some perspective change between the buildings on the corner, wrapping around the side of the set. So definitely was a challenge. Yeah. And I would not, I wouldn't put that building on the corner again. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the view was odd in itself, the real view. So it was hard to a brain, you know what I mean? We chose with a view that even if you look for real, it looks odd because of the terrain.
Yeah.
So we had the challenge to make that.
I mean, I think there was a choice made to not do it green screen and to go for the, you know, we looked at it in 3D as a model, and we looked at the 3D model of the city outside the set, and everything seems fine in the computer, as always. And then, but the translation of the 3D model, the 3D image onto a 2D plane with the perspective painted into it, or digitally painted into it, there's a difference, you know, for sure. I mean, I think we were at the bare minimum of like 18 or 20 feet away from the set as well, so that it could, sometimes you would see the backdrop quite clearly, and then other times you wouldn't, depending on the time of day that the light was, you know, what we were seeing.
I mean, the big challenge is the size of those windows.
Yeah, they were very big.
We see that's very, very, very small margin for error.
Right.
Yeah.
So obviously a bit of an unhappy accident there. Were there any sort of happy accidents that transpired during the course of shooting where you found an unexpected bonus in a scene or in a location that you were able to translate onto the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of found objects that really added to the art?
Right, that's a lot of locations to think about.
I can't think of.
So is it more important to have everything planned down to the last minute? I mean, do you find yourself very much following an existing storyboard and kind of sticking to the storyboard as much as possible? Particularly, I guess, with a period piece where your range of motion may be a bit more limited.
Yeah, I mean your audio is getting really bad, Phil. I'm not sure if I can fix it, but
Sorry,
the shooting period, everything has to
I'm
be.
gonna kill my video.
Yeah, everything has to be kind of decided in advance. I mean, when you shoot in the city or any set, you pan the camera 3-inch, 4-inch, to the right, and then suddenly nothing works. So it's tough to have that freedom that you have when you're shooting a contemporary project, or you're shooting in the country. A cornfield is fine, usually 360. So yeah, it's very hard to be. I mean, everything has to be planned and decided in advance. You can't just have the freedom that you have on other period.
Right. Yeah, it's not as
and same thing with sci-fi. Sorry.
Right. It's not as if you're going to get that happy accident of a random 1930s drove through your set.
Yeah. I mean, usually the happy accident for me, it's the weather. It's like suddenly like. Okay, you're there, and then this is the storm, and suddenly all the trees and all the vegetation moves in a very dramatic way, or that kind of thing. Is hard to, this is kind of, or you have the beautiful sky, that helps the scene. That's what makes the happy accident.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've all done some pretty visual effects heavy shows in your time. How does creating the past for Perry Mason compare to creating the near future on something like Westworld or or Logan, for that matter? I mean, is it more constricting because of historical accuracy? Is it more? What are the differences, Chris?
Well, I think with the period, you're definitely trying to be historically accurate. I know that John was very keen to stay accurate to the period, and so we did a lot of conceptual art around location work, and we would sort of make sure that that was the blueprint that moved forward to the visual effects department, to everybody really. Got to have copies of that artwork so that we were extending buildings, putting in billboards in the background, painting out buildings in our artwork, and sky colors and mood. So I think comparing it to something like Logan, where it's a little bit more of a road movie. So and a lot of the visual effects work is sort of tied to action scenes. I think for Perry Mason, there's a lot of, David can attest to this too, we shot a lot of street stuff downtown LA, and the 2/3 of the frame is good looking, and then there's sort of stuff above and to the left and to the right that just needs to get painted out. So I think there's a fair amount of cleanup work as far as backgrounds go for the visual effects department. I don't know if it's VFX heavy compared to other shows, because I think there's a lot of that goes into a period show these days, especially downtown LA. Wouldn't you say, David, that?
Right. So yeah, I mean, I guess mainly I would call cleanup or extension.
Yeah.
I mean, we always try to have our ground and the base in camera accurate, and then if we have to clean up, of course, a little bit, but and then the extension is done, in VFX. We had a couple of more heavy VFX, I would say, when for the Angel Flight, where that world was, so it was very much crucial. So that obviously we had to plan accordingly and figure out. And but that's the big VFX on this show, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, because we had to. The original Angels Flight Railroad was originally 4 blocks further up the street. Then they moved it, and the base and the top are still there. The original buildings, I think, were just rebuilt, but everything around it is 2017 or 2018. So I remember there was a lot of green screen painted onto things and stretched all the way up the hill. I think at one point there was a lot of green. So I definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing how that looks. Have you seen it, David? You have, probably. Yes.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. No, it looks great.
Good.
So questions coming for Darran from Brian Felty. Hi, Brian. On the CBS All Access Series $1, we used both scale scenery and soft backings. Do you have a preference, or is there a situation where you'd use one, not the other? This was in Pittsburgh, or the
That's right. Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, actually, because of the stage sets we had there, we actually built a police station in a very large stage, and then added a car park, and then added, a view across the street, which actually we had the room to do. And actually, it's great to have, and actually outside Perry's house as well, in our studio, you had trees, Chris, and there was various bits and pieces that actually just gave it a sense of being more realistic. So, I think we're always fighting for space in studios, because every department has their own needs. And, obviously the art department and the camera department are trying to, make something look very realistic that's on a stage. And we don't necessarily always have the space to do it, so. Yeah, but I like actually a mixture of the two. If you can have the backdrop and then some real, pieces between the actual building, the windows on the backdrop, that's ideal, because it just gives you nice depth,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we always recommend when we're talking to people about the drops. I mean, it's supposed to be background. It's not supposed to be sort of foreground. And I mean, we had one show that very successfully actually attached them to the windows, but you have to be insanely cautious about how you do that. And it's like one camera position, one angle, and then as soon as you move the camera, everything fails dismally.
Yeah.
So the more layering you can get in there, the better. I mean, just having one object between you and the backdrop is great, because just that, as you get that differential movement between a window and the object and the drop, really sells the idea that there's depth there. And of course we have the selective softening as well, so that there's depth of field built into the images, which I'm not really sure if it played in the house drop, because it was a lot of what you were doing was sort of way off in the distance anyway, because you had I want to say 30 feet outside the house. Was that right, Chris?
Close,
it was a good
like 25 feet or something. Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually a very generous throw between the drop and the house, which is always beneficial.
And I think the one you did for us on $1, Phil, was a bridge over a river, and there was defocusing in different layers. Like if I remember correctly, yeah, and it was very selective.
Yeah, that bridge. Then they used that same location on a show recently. This isn't okay. Is that right?
Okay.
It's an awesome bridge. I mean, it's this very, very beautiful, spindly arched bridge. Probably been there for 100 years or so, but it's a spectacular piece of engineering. But it's almost like anybody who shoots around Pittsburgh wants to get that bridge in because it's just so cool.
Yeah. Well, you never be short of bridges in Pittsburgh, for sure. I think there's like 437 of them or something.
And yet they keep coming back to that one. So
yeah, but it's the best looking one.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. So how did you two divide your shooting? I mean, presumably, was it alternating episodes, or did you do it by blocks? How did you break up the distribution as well?
It was blocks, wasn't it? So David did the first 3, I did the next 3, David did the last 2.
And
it was cross-boarded. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so does continuity become a major issue, or do you just spend an awful lot of time looking over each other's shoulders?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No. It's just, sorry to interrupt, David, but I think I was super nervous going after David, you know, because I was looking at all his dailies. But after the first couple of days, I turned around, I saw Tim and David on set. I think you had to talk to somebody about something. And I was hoping you weren't there for me, but I think you were pretty happy, so it was okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's amazing how, you know, I mean, when you do the show and you go in, not the first one, and you look at the stuff, but at the end, you like the way you like, you know, and you're allowed to veer off and to work with the director and try to achieve something. You know, I mean, doing shows like Game of Thrones made me realize how you don't have to be precious about it. I mean, we had 15 DPs, and I'm sure some people can recognize who it is, but most people don't. You know, for them, it's the same actor, the same costume, the same set, and that's what matters. And we veer, you know, I do this a bit more this way and this way, and I mean, we stay true to the show, but I mean, we don't have to follow, you know, oh my God, how we did it, or what kind of lamp he used, how much diffusion he used, you know what I mean? It's very, I think it's something that people who starting the business are a bit worried about and stuff, but you don't have to be worried. And usually the producer or me or whoever choose you because you're on the job, it's because they feel you can do the job, and you know, keep the same spirit, like I said. So it's like very quickly you let it go and you do how you do stuff efficiently and how, you know, to achieve the look. But as long as you're the same actor talking the same language, I think you're fine.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I think that's very true. And also, you know, for the DP, in my case, you're working with a different director, so that energy is different compared to the other DP and director's energy, you know. But keeping the spirit is the main thing, I think. And then obviously you experiment around that if you can.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and then in the art department, you know, we had a great working relationship all the way through prep with David and Tim, and we, you know, once we were designing sets and making sure we have the right, you know, windows here, windows there, no windows here, wild walls here, wild walls there for shooting. And then, I mean, for us, always in the art department, at least ones that I've worked in, that's the natural process, is to have the DP in on those conversations early on, so that we're designing and building sets for camera essentially. And then the gaffer and grips are getting involved, getting copies of our drawings constantly. But, you know, there really was no difference between working with David as a DP and then Darran as a DP in our process. It's still that the same set of sort of rules that we work with, you know, just having everybody be part of the conversation around the sets, you know, as they're being designed and built.
Do you find there's a tendency for to watching somebody else at work lets you up your game a little, or incorporate some of what they're doing into yours and then give it another twist? I mean, there's some turquoise in that shadow. Well, let's crank that up a bit. I mean, is it a cumulative process rather than the alternative, I guess, would be finding the lowest common denominator between the two of you, which by the look of the trailer is not what happened. I mean, it looks like you just kept growing. How is that though? I mean, it must be kind of weird, especially when you're doing blocks. So you've got 3 and you go off and you do your 3. Is there room for that sort of collaborative effort?
Darran?
Yeah, well, there was for me, like for example, if David had shot somewhere before me, like I'm thinking of large scenes, like you shot in the assembly before me, and that gave me so much more confidence to go in there. And it was actually the first, I think it wasn't the first day I shot with Denise, but it was pretty much the first. And yeah, because we actually had to shoot in our prep because you happened to be in locations that we could never return to. So I was thrown in with the director very early. But because I could see what David was doing like a couple of days beforehand, I think you started that on a Thursday and a Friday, and you shot on a Monday. So, I could watch before the weekend and take it on board. So, that was good. And then there was times where I had to shoot somewhere where that had never been shot. So, but I think I always find, like at the beginning of any project, whatever it is, the first couple of days are the days that everything needs to settle in and become more cohesive. And there after that you get a sense of comfort, but and you can just go forward. So, but yeah, it was yeah. So I think it's true to say that you should always be growing anyway, when you're working or as a person in life.
So we've got another question regarding the LED walls. I mean, David, you said the size limitation right now is a factor in the cost. Do you have a feel for how the cost compares to? I guess probably Chris actually would have a better feel for this. How the cost of like an LED wall would compare to the cost of backing? Does it come down to a per shot basis? And do you think that we're getting to a point where the backdrop's going to go away completely? Obviously, something dear to my heart, or otherwise, where the all stages. And is that the limiting factor, or is it still you still have to generate the content that goes on the screen, and then that becomes the cost factor? Have you looked at the relative costs of these things?
Yeah, okay, good. That's more Chris, no?
I think so, yeah.
Well, the work that I did on The Mandalorian was research. It was the R&D upfront testing of the whole pipeline. So it was LED screens, yes, a little virtual art department that built sets. We had real construction building sets, and the merging of all those pieces together. I was not privy to the cost of the LED screen. I mean, it was a very big one. It was a curved LED screen with ceilings and then 2 side pieces that could move in and out. So I think it was very expensive. And yes, you still have to create the content. And I really do think that at this point, it's still, it worked for them. And I think that kind of show that it works for, but I'm not sure that it's anything like, it would work for something like Perry Mason. It just doesn't. I think that your backdrops are still going to live for a long time, Phil.
Oh, thank God for that. Well, yes, very pleased to hear that one. Okay, so another question that's come in. ceiling heights. I mean, obviously, standard houses, my house, 8-foot ceilings throughout. The person asking the question though has asked or has made the comment that the DP always seems to request higher ceilings for lighting. But then when you go out on location, of course, you're back to practical ceiling heights. What are your feelings about this, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the nature of a show, but I have a tendency to like low ceilings. So I'm the one who is, so I'm always, that's one thing I'm really worried when I do the show, and I know there's another DP working after me, that they're gonna freak out, because I have a tendency not lighting from the ceiling because it's not natural for me. The minute I put my light too high, it doesn't look good. So I'm trying to treat most of the location, set as a practical location. So sometimes you want a tiny bit more room, so you can actually, you have to hang something, a smaller unit. But now, because of those great LED unit that we have, it's almost impossible to find a location where it's impossible to light. So I have a tendency to love hard ceiling, to put the ceiling in the shot as much as possible. So when we scout, me and, I mean, it's become a bit of a joke, but me and Tim, we look at the window and the ceiling, and if we like that, the rest we can figure out, and we can build. We can dress. That's what I mean. So for me, ceiling is very important. I cannot have it high, because the lower they are, the more they're in there.
Darran, anything to add to that?
No, I've got very similar to David. I don't like fake lighting. Putting a light where it would never be. It's like I like lighting from windows as well, and it being more sourcey. I quite often, in some locations, I quite often just neg out the ceilings as well, just to create more shape. So, and they usually use a very light material that they could just clip up to the ceiling.
So like a black ripstop, or?
Yeah, but it's not like blackout. It's nearly like a very thin plastic. It's very lightweight. I think I had to do it in a house where Della Streets lives, actually, in her actual room, because the ceiling was actually painted pink, I think, or something, and the walls were red. Chris, I don't know if you remember that, Della's actual bedroom.
Yes.
And it was a tough one. And John really wanted to use that wallpaper, which is very period. So I negged at the ceiling because the wallpaper was quite bright, So, yeah.
So, have you, either of you, or even Chris, come across the light distribution by mirrors approach? I know Jakob Ballinger, the gaffer over in Europe, is very keen on it, and works absolute wonders with it. But basically, starting with a large source and then distributing it by mirrors. Have you tried that at all?
Yeah, I've tried it, but you need a lot of time to do it. I worked with a key grip that has a selection of mirrors that are, I think, Jakob actually made. But it does take a while, and then they take up quite a lot of space. So it wasn't, for me, it was not a good day to be doing that, but maybe some other time I'll try it.
We did a demo at Camera Image last year where we just had a small drop up and in a small set, and we weren't quite sure how he was going to light it. And then suddenly this single, I think, source 4 came out, and then a bunch of mirrors, and suddenly this Japanese neon square was just full of light from one tiny source. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is.
And I guess it's just, do you want to carry lamps or do you want to carry mirrors? You end up carrying something either way.
Yeah. Sure.
So aside from the obvious enforced vacation that we've all been on, or at least alleged vacation, because it hasn't worked like that in Rosco land, due to the COVID, do you see any changes that are going to be taking place on sets? I mean, obviously the Art Directors Guild has put out their guidelines, and I've seen probably 5 different sets of guidelines, some of which are somewhat contradictory. Do you see that it's going to be a major change to the way that you guys do your jobs, or do you think that there's going to be a sort of let's let it settle down, let's let the Europeans try it and then learn from their mistakes? I mean, where do you see the future going? If we go round all of you, as we're getting towards the end, so maybe a minute each. So who wants to go first?
I mean, for the art department, I think that we're probably in the least amount of change because we're not, I mean, we are on set. There are certain elements of our department that are on set, and I think their world's going to change a little bit. But our prep, design, build, construction world that lives on stage, I think is fairly similar. I think they'll obviously have their safety protocols in place, but I don't think our process is going to change that much. For locations, it'll be similar. There'll just be safety protocols and cleaning and sanitizing. But when you do get to the sound stage and you get to the actual shooting crew, I'm not sure how much that's going to change for you guys, David and Darran. You know, I'm sure you've had some conversations with your guild and other co-workers. I mean, do you think it's going to change that much?
I think at the moment, if we had to go out and shoot, it'd be very difficult, especially for the camera crew and the grips. Well, actually, every department's under cinematography, because you know, there's a certain number of people. I think altogether you could be looking at about 30 people who are in close proximity with each other all day long.
Right.
Your camera operator and your first AC can be, you know, everybody can be separated for sure. Maybe we can do things with less crew, but then it's a time impact. It's like if you're going to split a crew in half, it's going to take you at least twice as long to shoot what you were intending to shoot. And I think a lot of it is common sense, you know, and I think, you know, you have to make sure that you have the right team around you, you know, that are going to watch, you know, look after each other. So I've read all the guidelines, and I think most of it is common sense, but to see it go to work practically is going to be very interesting, you know. So we're about to get a lot of news because of all the protests in the next 2 weeks about what's happened with COVID, you know.
Yeah,
it's like, you know, we're going to know a lot more in 2 weeks, and then, but I know every department has a say in this, and I think there's going to be a lot of conflict, and hopefully it isn't endless, you know. So the conversations.
David?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have a feeling we're going to put in place all those things that'll be common sense, and they're going to be a bit of a chaos at the beginning, and what's right and what's not. And by the time we kind of all figure it out, it's going to be mute. I mean, we have to be careful, of course, and it's going to be common sense, and we're going to try to establish some kind of rule, but we still have to live. And I think it's something we have to live with. The COVID-19, somehow we won't be able free of that, no matter what. And so the rule, what I don't want to happen is some kind of a completely crippled way of making movies. But when you go out and you go buy your grocery, it's completely different world, right? So sometimes I hope we're not going to go completely up, you know, across the board or across, you know, to be the other side that's so safe that it's impossible to shoot. What I want, you know, basically what I wish is going to be in store, but I don't think it's going to happen. That will be a bit more like European, in that shooting 10 hours a day, and we can shoot with smaller crew as long as we can have a bit of time to do it, so not everybody's on top of each other, you know. But no matter what's the people in front of the camera won't have masks, and they're gonna have to be close to each other. So we can solve all the problem behind the camera, but in front of the camera, it's still gonna be the same problem. So I don't think once we solved that's been with you know, with the vaccine, I guess, then, you know, I don't think we'll be back to normal.
Okay, so we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel that we still had topics we could have covered, but I think we had a good session. Thank you for your time, and thanks everybody who tuned in. I hope it was instructive. It certainly, I've been making notes like crazy, so there's a few things that I learned along the way. Yeah, just thanks for all who came, thanks for all who participated, and we'll be doing another one of these probably at the beginning of July. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.